Okay, I'd like to start this work session. Thank you for the chair for handing me the gavel for this session. So I had asked Brad to speak on this issue and also the utilities to come and speak about this. You might have read a little bit in the press about this issue. Basically, this dam is coming down and there's some interest among a lot of people in trying to restore this river and this fishery, but it's, as we're going to learn, it's quite a complicated issue. And as I've tried to work on it over the last year, I've kind of I'll get one answer from one group of people and then a different answer from another group of people. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of get things all out in the open, sort of lay out people's positions in a shared set of facts, and then we can have some time for question and answer, hopefully a lot of question and answer at the end of the work session. Yeah. Thank you. So the chair has reminded me that we should identify ourselves for the record. So can we start with you, Mr. Croft?
Eric Croft, Assembly.
Felix Rivera.
Forrest Dunbar.
Dick Trainey. Tim Steele.
Amy DeBoston.
Brett Dice.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
We keep going down.
Brad Micklejohn, Conservation Fund.
Mark Johnston, MLMP. David Bersinger, Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility.
Bill Falsey, Municipal Attorney.
Mike Abbott.
I'm Tony Izzo with Matt-Newsco Electric.
Thank you.
Dave Lyons, Matt-Newsco Electric.
Andrea Pond, Harrison Clifford. Kristen Collins, the Alaska Center. Sophie Fiddler, Ingrid Waterways Council. Jessica Lumpley, Devin Curley, ADM.
Dustin Hires, Chugach Electric.
Ed Jenkins, MEA.
Julie Esty, Matt-Newsco Electric. Julie Haskett, Chugach Electric.
Lance Powell, Anchorage Waterways Council.
Kristen Slon, Chugach Voter Center.
Thank you, and I particularly appreciate MEA and Chugach coming today. I know that neither of you are presenting, but we need to have all the stakeholders at the table, or at least listening to this, again, hopefully shared set of facts. So with that, Brad, would you like to start with the first presentation?
Thanks very much, Forrest. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and Assembly members. I think very interested in the topic. It's gotten a lot of press, both locally and nationally, and probably seen this piece in the Dispatch News. Just to get you oriented, the work to remove the lower Eklutna Dam is taking place just north of Anchorage in the Eklutna River Valley. Here seen in the center of the photo, the light blue building that you can see in the middle is the AWU Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility Facility where they treat water coming out of Eklutna Lake. The native village of Eklutna is off to the left. You can see one of the knobs for which the village is named. The Glen Highway runs through the center of the photo. We're seeing the estuary for the Eklutna River there in the foreground. As you all know, the native village of Eklutna is one of the oldest communities in south central Alaska, and Eklutna Native Corporation is the largest landowner in Anchorage and one of the largest in south central Alaska as well. The village is located there because of the abundant resources there, including the salmon that used to run up the Eklutna River. Amazingly, 5 species of salmon still use the Eklutna River despite the fact that it's a bare trickle of its historical levels. There's an old dam located in a steep canyon about a mile up from the Glen Highway. This dam was built in 1929 by Frank Reed. Quite an architectural feat at the time. It was built in the course of about 1 year throughout the winter. It's an arch construction about 90 feet wide, about 70 feet tall, 9 feet thick at the base, and about 5 feet thick at the top. As you can see, water is pouring over the brim of the dam now because the reservoir that used to support water and was diverted through a tunnel is now full of sediment. So that dam was abandoned in about 1955 and has been a moribund, orphan, unmaintained dam ever since. And Office of Dam Safety here at DNR has shown some concern with its potential failure, although it's not at all weak. It's survived the 64 earthquake, but because it is unmaintained, there's been prolonged interest in having it removed. So there's been talk of that for several decades. The Army Corps of Engineers did a study on the Eklutna River back in 2011 and identified the removal of the lower Eklutna Dam as one of the top priorities for the restoration of the Eklutna River. So this shows basically the plumbing and the layout of the basin. The dam that's being removed in this project is in red. The Glen Highway off to the left, the railroad bridge below it. The Eklutna River ostensibly runs from Eklutna Lake down through a canyon about 8 miles to the lower Eklutna dam, but it's basically there's no water running through that canyon at present. Most of the water is diverted through two pipes, two straws, one to a power plant over on the Old Glen Highway. It's called the Eklutna Power Plant, a federal project built in 1955 that basically rendered the lower dam obsolete, and then the straw that feeds the Awood treatment plant. We'll get into more of the details of that. Here's a picture of the dam in construction in 1929. It's a pretty tough spot to work in. The canyon's about 400 feet deep, quite a spectacular canyon, and the project is proving complicated, but we're making headway in removing it. A schematic from the time when the dam was built, the water was diverted from that impoundment of the lower Eklutna River, lower Eklutna Dam through a tunnel to a penstock that's now behind the new MEA generating station there in Eklutna. And then the power was run into Anchorage. It was Anchorage's first major power supply at the time. And again, rendered obsolete in 1955 with the construction of the new facility, and has been unmaintained ever since. So the Conservation Fund embarks in partnership with Eklutna Village Corporation and Eklutna Construction and Management to remove the dam. The project started in 2015, gained steam in 2016 as we worked on securing permits, and we're hard at the work now in 2017 and expect to complete it by year's end. And expected to expend about $7.5 million on removing this dam and create about 30 jobs in the process. You might have seen the crane in your travels up and down the Glen Highway. It's quite a spectacular sight in and of itself. It's the largest crane in Alaska, owned by STG Cranes. It's 400 feet tall from basically bow to tip. And we've also had to construct a staircase down into the canyon. That's that white thread running down kind of the middle of the photo. And the dam itself is about center left of the image there. You're seeing a little bit of water running over the brink of that dam. This is the staircase going down in, built by Mike's Welding. A little shout out to them. They built the stairways and dip nets that people use down on the Kenai. We didn't get the dip net last year. It's probably our fault. The dam is under active deconstruction currently. They've removed about 10% of the structure so far. We've run into some challenges along the way, but still confident that the dam will be fully removed in 2017. A little drone footage of the setting. This filmed last fall. We have a grant from Patagonia to make a movie of the project. That should be completed sometime in early 2018. So we're looking at the crane pad. The crane itself took 40 tractor trailer truckloads to install. It's a massive piece of equipment. And the crane was not used in the demolition of the dam, but for locating equipment down into the canyon. We had no other way of accessing the site. No way to build a road into this canyon. So it tells you a lot about how tough these guys were to build this dam in the first place. It's really quite a remarkable work site. So the dam lies right below the brink of the canyon there, right below the crane. So down, looking straight down onto the lip of the dam now. So the crane has put into the canyon, I think, 8 different pieces of heavy equipment, bulldozers and backhoes and excavators. They're down there now working. And again, you're seeing the part of the stairwell coming down center right of the photo, winding its way down into the canyon. It's a pretty spectacular staircase. If you're wanting to get a tour, I'm happy to take folks out there. It is an active work site, though. We need to carefully manage the visitation of the canyon. The stairs are the equivalent of, I think it's the St. John's Cathedral, or about 500 steps to get from bottom to top, and right now the current record is about 1:40. So if you want to give that a shot, we'd be happy to host it. So that's the active work. The partners we've had involved in the project ourselves, Eklutna Inc., and the list on down. A lot of coordination with various state and federal agencies to secure the needed permits and the needed funding to make this project go forward. Now, we're not just in this to take down some deadbeat dam. We're in this to restore a river, and this river has been in degraded condition for about 90 years due to water diversions out of the basin. This is a photo of Eklutna Lake. I'd argue one of the most spectacular locations in Chugach State Park. It's worth noting that all the land around Eklutna Lake is owned by the Eklutna Native Corporation, managed in partnership with Chugach State Park. You see the basic problem here on the right-hand side of the photo. The lake is operated in a drawn-down condition most of the year and doesn't flow out. It's the exit for the Eklutna River is on the right-hand side of the photo. So the water typically has no way of getting from the lake into the Eklutna River. Here's a photo of what the Eklutna River looks like currently. Kind of an arrow configuration showing where the once informal river used to be and might someday be. But the fact remains that the water has been diverted out of the basin for a good 70 years, and despite that fact, there are still 5 species of salmon in the lower Eklutna. The Eklutna Power Plant, built in 1955 with federal money, transferred to the current consortium of private utilities. And this is the Eklutna River coming out in a very different place. It's a beautiful blue aquamarine Kenai River type flow compared to the little drainage ditch that now represents the Eklutna River as you cross it on the highway going north. Basic schematic of the allocation of water from Eklutna Lake: 90% going to produce power, representing about 2 to 3% of the South Central grid capacity, 10% of the water going for drinking water through the AWU facility. It seems as if the drinking water is a very precious resource that's hard to replace. It could be argued that the power might be more easily replaced. Seemingly there's enough water to export in bottled water. AWU sells water to a bottling company, at least not for the fish. This agreement, for which the municipality is a signatory, top line signatory, was executed in 1991, came into effect in 1997, I believe, 1998, and called out various impacts associated with the 1955 federal power project and a timeline for mitigating those impacts. Consultation with these various state and federal agencies to begin 25 years after the date of transfer in 1998, so that should be, I think, 2022 is when all that is supposed to be initiated, no later than. I think that's the operative language. These consultations and mitigations can start beforehand without penalty. They can't start later than. A bit of text from the agreements of transfer. There was purported to be a soccer run to Eklutna Lake. There are still kokanee in Eklutna Lake, a form of landlocked red salmon. It's also worth pointing out that there are still king salmon in the lower Eklutna River, despite the low volume of water. Kings are about half out of the river. So with that, that wraps up my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brad. And for my colleagues, I'd like to have if it's okay with you, I'd like to have the utilities present next, and then we have questions for both of them afterwards, if that's okay. Yes, Fred?
Yeah. I'm curious why the Eklutna people are not represented here.
I think that Curtis, so Brad, you work with Curtis, right?
Yeah, he had something come up today that apologies, he couldn't join in. He's worked very closely with Curtis between CEO and Eklutna.
Did you hear that, Fred?
He had a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I've been on emails with Curtis and Brad together. I know that they're aware of it.
John's joined us.
Oh, yeah, know for the record that we've been joined by Mr. John Weddleton. So now if we could have the presentation by the utilities. Also, Brad, could we get that presentation emailed to us afterwards?
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. We're gonna share the time, and we worked jointly, MLMP and AWU, to put together this presentation. So I'm gonna let David start it off.
So this is just kind of an overview of the Eklutna Lake. That red outline is basically the boundary of the watershed. It's not a very large watershed if you compare it to other large Kenai watershed. If you look down at the southern edge of that, kind of on the right side, is the Eklutna Glacier. That's primarily where the majority of the water that flows into the Eklutna Lake comes from. There's some drainage as well from the surrounding mountains. It's fairly small and fairly steep, so that precipitation generally flows into the lake at a fairly rapid pace. This slide kind of gives an overview of the lake. If you saw in the last presentation, our pipeline for the municipal drinking water goes down through the canyon, goes back up onto the hill above the canyon right before the treatment plant, and flows into acres from that. There's also
Yeah, ours is the green. It is about a 4.5, 5 mile tunnel that goes through the mountain and comes out at the power plant on the other side, and that's what provides water to the power plant.
And also noteworthy on this is where we connect in. We actually connect into the tunnel that goes through the mountain. The utility owns a tunnel that's about a mile long that goes through the mountain and intercepts the inlet tunnel. After it comes out of that, it basically follows the river course, crisscrosses back and forth across. There's also a very limited access road down through the canyon that we use to access our pipeline, our corrosion protection system, and various components that we have on our raw water pipeline.
This graph shows you the lake level, historic lake level over the last, I believe, 25, 30 years. You'll notice that in June and then in May, that throughout the year that it starts somewhere between 820 feet and 830 feet. 820 feet you'll see is the intake, and so the lake level has to be maintained above that, or we can't take water out for the city's drinking water or for electric generation. The bulk of the inflows, about 83% of the inflows, actually come in between July and September. So what you will see is that the lake is fairly low, the water comes in, it reaches its peak sometime in around September, early part of October, and then is managed to utilize the water for both drinking water and electric production for the rest of the year. And there's I think a sense that the power plant runs all of the time generating electricity, and while historically that has not been true, over the last several years it has run all the time at its lowest level, because we have issues with the power plant and the seals that bring the water in through the piping, and those are being addressed with some rehab work that's being done this year and next year. This year we're working on Unit 1, next year we're working on Unit 2, and once that work is done, then we will be able to, at times, shut off the power plant, basically. And when it runs at its lowest level, it's running about 2 to 3 megawatts, and at its peak, it will run closer to 40 megawatts.
So this slide kind of depicts what Mark just said about how the lake's operated, and where the various components are. The dam crest is about 871. Our treatment plant sits down about elevated 630, and then both of the tunnels connect together before they go out into the lake, where they actually draw water from Eklutna Lake.
So, because of the way that the water flows into the lake, it's difficult to be able to provide an even flow, and that's one of the reasons why historically we have not run the plant at times, and we run it at lower levels during most of the year. We run the plant at higher levels to maintain the water level, but the water has to be in the lake in order to be able to do that. In the last slide, you saw 871. When the water level reaches that level, that's when the lake will spill. So the water will go over the dam. Since 1986, we've actually spilled water 6 times. So what that, I guess, demonstrates is that if you're looking for a consistent flow of water, you can't do it by spilling the water. It's impossible. And as we saw with that other graph, what you see is the spring level from that 820 to 830. The lake level will rise 40 to 50 feet up to the crest. And I believe 2 of the years that we did spill were record rainfall years, and that's generally the times when we're going to be in a position to spill. is even running the hydro project at full capacity, if it is a record year of inflows, we can't keep up with the water. So you also could see from that diagram that water going over it, there's not an easy way to discharge water from the lake into the riverbed. And about the only way that we currently have to do that is to do it during a spill situation. And assuming that we had water there's not really an easy way for the fish, if the goal was to put the fish into the lake, there's not an easy way for them to get back in, because this does not have a fish ladder or any other mechanism for them to get back into the lake. Brad covered quite a bit of this. The original dam was built, the lower dam, which they are removing, was built in 1929. 55 is when we commissioned, when the federal government commissioned the project as it currently exists. In 87, there was a provision, an agreement signed between AWU and MLMP for the city's water supply. And for your information, the water that comes that goes to AWU for the city's water supply, it comes out of MLMP share. MLMP owns 53% of the project, Chugach owns 30%, and MEA owns 17%. It shows you the three partners there, and as Brad mentioned, the 1991 agreement was signed, and it actually the transfer went into effect in 1997, October 2nd, I believe, which will be on one of the other slides.
This just talks a little bit more about the Fish and Wildlife Agreement and the parties that are part of that agreement. It's a very complex agreement. A lot of different entities involved.
Wait a minute, why wasn't Eklutna, is that included under others?
They would be a part of the public. These are specific agencies, both federal and state, that are called out in the agreement. And the agreement does have provisions for public input, and Eklutna would be part of the public input.
Okay, I don't like that, but I understand that's what it is, thank you.
The transaction date, it closed on October 2nd, 1997. There are three timelines that kick into different provisions. 25 years from that date, so October 2nd, 2022, the utility partners are required to start putting together the plan, so initiate the plan. That plan has various steps that go through where we get input from the state and federal agencies as well as the public. We have to put out the draft plan for comment. We then take their comments into consideration, redraft the agreement or the plan, and then it goes to the final step is it goes to the governor for final approval, and he has to make a public interest determination taking into account a number of factors. The city water supply, the economical production of power. It talks about environmental concerns. It talks about mitigation of fish and wildlife, recreation, and there are a number of things that are within that agreement that the governor needs to give equal weight to in making a determination as to whether or not the plan is sufficient. Once the plan is approved by the governor, then it needs to be implemented no later than October 2nd of 2027. And then it gives us 5 years to complete the mitigation plan on October 2nd of 2032. We'll go over just a couple of things. There have been suggestions that this isn't a big deal, that the utilities don't really get that much out of it. These are just some of the statistics for MLMP. If we lose the Eklutna power, it equates to about 5.8% of the power that we generate that we sell to our customers. And if it is not available, then we need to replace it with higher cost gas-fired units. That cost is about $5.2 million annually to our customers. And that's on top of what we're already paying. Because under the agreement, if we generated no power, we still, as 53% owner, have to pay 53% of the cost of the project. And so the $5.2 million would be an additional amount that our ratepayers would pay. If you look at the amount of power that is generated, then by using the gas-fired generation, it adds an additional 39,235 tons of carbon annually into the atmosphere. And as I mentioned, the annual inflows are about 82%, 82.6%, and they occur primarily between June and September. If you look at some of the other months, there's virtually no inflows into the lake during those months.
And so from AWW standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, our pipeline basically follows the course of the river down through the canyon. Now, the upper part of the canyon is fairly unstable slopes. There's a lot of sandstone and basically sedimentary type material that is prone to landslides. We've also got a road that goes down through there to access the pipeline, as well as all of our infrastructure along that. So we have concerns about potential flooding depending on how much water's in there. There may be issues with scouring of the pipeline or uncovering it. There may be issues with accessing it with vehicles for routine maintenance as well as emergency operations, because there are no bridges in that stretch. Another thing that's come to our attention as well is the diminished hydroflows could also impact the Eklutna tailrace fishery, which the state has significantly invested in to allow public use of that area.
And I believe that Brad had a picture of that tailrace fishery in his presentation. And I will tell you that it is very popular. And this summer, as we have taken the units offline and the flow into the tailrace has been diminished, we've gotten a number of calls from fishermen because it's affecting their ability to catch fish, and they are very unhappy about it. So I guess in conclusion, the agreement doesn't mandate that we return flows to the river. What it mandates is that we study and put together a plan to mitigate the damage to the river, to the fish and wildlife. It actually says that you have to, in looking at the plan, that the governor has to balance a number of factors, and they have to be equally balanced to determine whether or not the plan and its implementation is in the public interest. And the cost and benefits of the mitigation have to be considered. And then, of course, the last is that we have the utilities, MEA, Chugach, and MEA, as well as AWU. We have been working closely with Eklutna. I've attended, well, I believe all three of the utilities have attended all of the joint meetings that they have held with the state and federal agencies and giving updates. I stay in contact with Curtis frequently to make sure that we're providing whatever support that we can. The other issue, of course, for this year is that we anticipated, since we were going to be doing maintenance, that there was the possibility that we would spill water. In a normal year, that probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, but when you have equipment and people working in the canyon, that was going to be a major problem. And so what we have done is, for the last 6 months, we've been working closely with them, identifying their schedule and when they were going to be doing things. Since we knew that we would be taking the units down, and at one point we had both units down, we drew the lake level down as low as we possibly could to give us as much time as possible in the event that we weren't able to bring the units back on when we want. And with one unit running, we've seen the lake start to rise, and even with the rain that we have, we believe that we will be able to control it to keep it from spilling, because obviously as there are people in there and they're doing their work, we don't want to be spilling a bunch of water and cause problems, or life and safety problems for the folks that are actually down there. And that is the end of our presentation, and we are available for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I'd like to have questions from my colleagues to either Mark or to Brad. I also kind of envision this a little more collaborative if there are questions or comments from the audience to each other or to either the presenters. I also welcome those. So Amy, do you want to go first?
Well, I think it's important that, as Fred pointed out, obviously Curtis is traveling and he can't be here today, so I just want to recognize that the earlier statement that all stakeholders are here at Eklutna, just because of scheduling couldn't make it. But I think it's important to hear from MEA too, because they're an important stakeholder. So my comment, and I don't care when it happens, is I really want to hear from either Tony Izzo or David Glines to hear about the impact to MEA. This area is a huge area for Chugach River, and MEA is the provider out there. So I think it's important at some point during this meeting to hear from them.
Yeah, so would someone, MEA, and I know we didn't ask you to prepare a presentation, but is there anyone that's prepared to make maybe short remarks commenting on either of the presentations?
Sure.
Yeah, please. Can you introduce yourself again?
My name is Tony Izzo with the CEO of Matanuska Electric Association. We serve a service area including Eagle River, Chugach, and the valley that's the size of West Virginia. So in addition to the second largest population center, we serve the Chugach Eagle River area. Looking at the statistics that were shown, I did a little bit of quick math. Eklutna, this dam provides approximately 4% of our annual power. If that were to go away, it would increase rates by $2 million per year. And that doesn't include the, not prepared to comment on the carbon output, but I know that it would be a significant effect on our air quality permit as well if we needed to go and increase that.
Thank you.
Forrest, I would note that Dustin Hires is here from Chugach, and I don't know if he would like to comment. But
I don't really have anything to add. I saw Mark's presentation before the meeting, and we reviewed it together. Nothing to add. Looks solid as far as that goes. We haven't done our own calculations for percentage of power and things like that, but his numbers look accurate, so I think if you extrapolate those, that would be Chugach's impact.
Thank you. So I have a question then for you, Mark, and for Tony. You mentioned $2 million and you mentioned 5.2 million, I believe, and that's if you take it completely offline. Is that right? That's if you took 100% of the water?
for us, it would be taking our 53% share off.
Right.
And with excluding the water that goes to Able.
Right.
We take that out.
So 100% of your share that comes down the pipe that delivers power. But my understanding is that, unless I'm mistaken, and Brad, you can speak to this, I don't think anyone is suggesting taking all of the water. Perhaps I'm mistaken. And Brad, have you guys talked about that? Are you talking about taking all of the water that goes to the power plant or some portion of it?
That's not my decision.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a question of how you deliver the water to the river without shutting the power plant down. I mean, that's kind of the simplest solution.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to operate the lake at a much higher level, which they said they don't have the capacity to do. I think there's an analogy with Cooper Creek, which was retrofitted recently with a cyclone to deliver water into Cooper Creek, and I think you guys know about that.
Okay. Yes, Fred?
Yeah, thanks. Is there anyone here that can speak with some authority, perhaps briefly, about the history of the fish run in this system and the challenges to restore it?
Well, I'm not a fish biologist. All I know is the fish are still there, and that's kind of amazing. You still have all 5 species using that river, even though the river's about that deep. So, there are still landlocked salmon in the Eklutna Lake. Fish and Game said they didn't put them there, so there used to be a socket run to Eklutna Lake prior to these dams being constructed in 1929.
And I understand that all the gravel mining, out on the lower levels of the river, has also disturbed the fish there as well. It would seem to me that ultimately our goal ought to be to restore, what we can to the pre-construction activities. But I realize there's practical difficulties with that. It would probably be irritating to have Anchorage's water supply cut off. So, anyways, all right, thank you. If there's someone who's, Tony, sir?
I'm sorry, no, I thought we were done, Senator, but I just had a comment to add on the prior question.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Tony, did you want to?
Yes, just to follow up on the, because I don't know what percentage of water might be used, but I would just advise that if we're talking about a percentage, 10%, 20%, whatever that percent is, it's not a direct correlation in terms of the cost impact. So I said $2 million a year, I'd have to go out and buy natural gas, it might be increased maintenance cost, it could be increased permitting cost due to the output, thermal generation output. The correlation I would draw it to is there's a time of use value. So my calculation on $2 million is that it all goes away based on my average cost of gas. If 20% of it went away and I couldn't use it during the peak times in the winter months, now we're talking about a much higher number because I'm not paying $7 something for gas, I'm paying $10. So it isn't a direct correlation.
So I had a question for you, Mark, or for Brad. You talked about how the governor has to develop recommendations based on the public interest. Is the impact on the native village of Eklutna one of the specific things they have to consider? I think the Senator Dyson raised this, that it didn't appear that when this was drafted in 1991, it didn't seem like the native village of Eklutna was given a seat at the table, any kind of government-to-government relationship there. So is the impact on the village specifically one of the things the governor has to consider?
My reading of the agreement as specifically is no, other than it talks about effects to the public. It talks about mitigating damage to fish and wildlife, and obviously that is part of what Eklutna is looking for, is restoration of the salmon. So in that aspect, yes, it does address their desires, but doesn't specifically address Eklutna.
Yeah. But, I mean, obviously, the impact on Eklutna, I mean, there's impact on the public more broadly, but the impact on Eklutna and the native village of Eklutna was much larger than sort of any other group of people, right, in the area. And yet they weren't given a seat at the table when this agreement was forged, right? Is that a fair characterization of what happened?
I wasn't around in 1991, so I don't know if they were at the table or not, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, Mr. Steele, you had a question?
I do have a question. It relates to the water that the municipality currently gets from Eklutna. Are we expecting a decrease or elimination of that source of water?
No.
And I guess the easy answer, and I think Brad addressed this a little bit, that the answer is we don't know. That would be a priority for the city, obviously, is to maintain the water supply for the drinking water. But we don't know specifically how much water and when they want the water. And so without doing the study, it's rather difficult to say.
There's going to be costs. We just don't know what kind of costs or changes they're going to be yet.
Right. There are costs associated with doing the studies. There are costs associated with implementing any plan to mitigate whatever those costs may be.
Now, you just built Plant 2A, which uses that water because of its temperature to make that plant more efficient. Have you factored those costs into this scenario?
We have not, as Tony mentioned, we calculated the $5.2 million on an average basis, what the average cost of producing the power would be. And as Tony mentioned, the way that the partners operate the plant is they use it to peak shave and to provide power during times where it would otherwise be very expensive to provide the power. You may need to start another unit. And so that number is, it could be exactly right, it could be low, it could be slightly high. And we did not take into account the efficiency gains that we have related to Plant 2A, which it adds about 5 megawatts to the capacity of the plant.
It seems to me there's an awful lot of unknowns at this point.
And you are correct, and I think that's why the process was set up the way that it was, that it gives the partners the opportunity to come up with a plan, be thoughtful in the approach to it, a 5-year period, but during that 5-year period, it's not you wait until the end of the 5 years and then show the plan. You provide the draft plan, you give the interested parties the opportunity to provide feedback. You then go back, incorporate that into the plan, and then put out the final plan.
Thank you. Is that okay, Mr. Steele?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Brad, you wanted to say
Yeah, I
something?
just have a couple comments. It's worth pointing out that AWU buys its water from ML&P to the tune of about $700,000 payment per year. So that's something to be factored in. If the power plant were to shut down, there might be a potential offset to the AWU customers and free water. There seems to be an ample supply of water. The water that's discharging from the power plant at the Old Plant Highway is perfectly potable. Understanding that that's a hard delivery to get it to flow to Anchorage from that point. I think third, just curious that Eklutna owns all the land around Eklutna Lake and the Eklutna River, but ended up with no water rights. It's a strange artifact of history.
So I have a question for the utilities. So you can see on this plan, it says we have until 2022 to initiate the plan, and then until 2032 to complete the plan. So, really long, but this was started again in 1997. Is there anything to stop us, aside from the fiscal reality, anything to stop us from initiating that plan early and getting this process started? We have to do it eventually, right? So why not start it now rather than wait till 2022?
We could start it now, and one of the things in talking with Curtis that we have talked about is that they intend to do studies of the river after taking down the lower dam to see how the removal of the lower dam affects the part of the river from where the lower dam is to connect. And we anticipate utilizing that information to also then study, what the effects would be on the portion of the river that currently, as Brad mentioned, is pretty much dry from the lower dam up to the upper dam. But to answer your question, there's nothing to stop us from doing it sooner. I think that even if we started, it is still a lengthy process to go through.
Yes. Mr. Crop, did you have something? I thought I saw your hand.
No, I was just clearing my throat, but if you're going to give me the opportunity, so nobody has a salmon study over how much water we would need in what periods of time to sustain modest salmon runs. We just don't know what that amount of water is.
We've done some early analysis with HDR. They've been our primary consultant on this, and the numbers are in the range of 50 to 100 cubic feet per second on an annual basis. Probably less in the winter and more in the summer.
Yep.
So that represents about anywhere from 25 to 10 to 25% of the total discharge from the basin based on our early inspection.
I'd love to see that report. It does seem to me that at least very generally the timing fits. That is, we have most of our inflow to the lake in the months you'd want the most flow in the river for salmon purposes. In July, June, July, August, maybe into September is when you're starting to get the most water coming in to the lake and the most possibility of overflow. But is that generally right?
I think so. I'm not going to commit to that. There are a couple other things that should be pointed out. In the construction of the federal project in 1955, there were two streams that were diverted into the lake on the south side and on the north side that could, in fact, be straightened out as a relatively simple technical fix to get some water into the Eklutna River without altering the operations of the power facility. So those are relatively simple fixes.
Wait a minute, they were diverted out of the lake bed?
Diverted into there, so they're on the lower edge. I don't have a map of the lake, but one is coming off of Twin Peaks and it's burned to run into the lake and capture that additional water. That could be straightened out into its original channel to run into the Eklutna River and provide at least some flow.
But that's just a net loss, whether it comes into the lake or it comes in later. Thank you.
Well, and I believe that, and Brad can correct me on this if I'm wrong, they need somewhat consistent flows, maybe more in the summer, but they do need water in the winter.
It's not zero
to
in
keep
the
the river from freezing. Because if you have a salmon go up and they spawn and then the water freezes, it doesn't do you any good. And that he is correct, those two streams were diverted into the lake, and I don't know that anybody has done a study as to how much water would be provided from either of those and whether or not that would be sufficient.
Mr. Steele, you had a question?
Yeah, it just seems to me, at the risk of stating the obvious, it just seems to me that we're faced with this pretty serious risk to water and electricity generation, and to reestablish the fishery. And I just wonder if anybody has even thought about a cost-benefit study to see what that might be. The trouble is, it's economics, and it's also just social value in terms of the fishery. But it just it seems to me like there's an awful lot of risk involved that we just don't know about. No? Yes? Maybe?
I would agree with you that nobody has done a cost-benefit analysis, and that's part of the process because it requires us to cost the mitigation strategies as well as the benefits that they provide, but then, the detrimental benefits to other parts that are taken into account. And the bottom line for us is that, as you mentioned, or may have been forced, that there are a lot of unknowns, and we don't know what we don't know at this point, and that's why I think the process was set up the way that it was, to take a deliberative approach, and it's a 15-year period, but you spent 5 years figuring out what to do, spent 5 years actually putting it in place, and then after that, then you have to be done. But then once you finish, 25 years later, you start the whole process over again.
Mr. Croft, you had a question?
Yeah, well, I'm worried I'm still missing something on diverting the streams. That doesn't make any difference, does it, whether they go in here and you pull the power out or put directly into it? I'm worried about it. But isn't it a net? So then you just, if we diverted that, you would have less water in the lake to use.
You're right. You would have less water in the lake to use, but I think Brad's point, and I don't want to speak for you, Brad, is that it's a rather, and this is in quotes, easy way to divert them back, and then it puts some water back into the river because it bypasses the dam, where we are in a position that, unless we allow the water to rise up to the level that it spills, it's done that 6 times in 31 years. And so it's a way to put water into the stream. Now, is it enough water? Is it going to make a difference? I think the answer is nobody knows.
Is the flip side true as well? Like, enough that it spills over. Do you ever say, we're going to not draw water for power because the lake is getting too low? Or do you do it based on your power needs only?
No, we will manage the generation of power based on the lake level, because obviously we can't allow the lake level to get below 820. Actually, 821 it starts to whirlpool, and that's where the intake is for the pipe. And if it gets below 820, then there's not going to be the water going through that we need to go into the city's water supply.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Croft. The amazing is with the volume of Eklutna water that comes to the city, it's still not enough sometimes a year. The city has several wells around it, right? In order to supplement that. And, even the most ardent supporter of the Eklutna people have got to realize that there's a huge public benefit and risk that goes with that water supply. And it is a huge resource for our whole area. And parenthetically, in some new developments that Eklutna is working on, they're going to use the water from that pipeline and so on. So it's a many-faceted thing. Tony's right. Hydropower is pretty cheap, and it's I would think it's great to run a baseline power, but you want to use it for a peaking machine, that's your business. But there's a downside cost, and during my years of paying attention, we've watched the whole area get into crisis. You know, if a line goes down, a transformer goes out, or a machine goes down, then, you know, it has been, and MLMP's running their diesel-fueled generators at significantly accelerated costs. And with the other people on the grid not cheerfully ponying up to help out on the costs and so on. So Tony's point, there's going to be an impact on his ratepayers and so on. And as a regulated utility, they don't have any way of passing the costs on except in the rate base. I mean, you can't have a bake sale or auction off the office machinery, you know, or equipment. So it's a valid thing that has to be considered. From my perspective, drinking water for Anchorage and then the restoration of the fish habitat is a priority. But it's going to be, can be at high demand times. The reservoir is low, a real problem for the MEA operating and their ratepayers is if we ever get the grid redundant and looped, will that eliminate and some economic dispatch? Will that mitigate your issue?
Well, certainly, economic dispatch, we believe, we're well underway in that process of forming the entire pool, and that's where we're going to see the majority of the savings because of the reduction in the increased efficiency. In addition to the complexities that you picked up on, utilities are somewhat different. We realize that you guys might own a little bit of its gas supply. Most don't. And we're long lead time, capital intensive. I have a contract that runs through 2023. There's some flexibility in that, but it isn't a matter of, in addition to getting that water rate of its higher value, that could create an imbalance or a greater proportionate impact in terms of higher rates. I may also be faced with the challenge of going out to buy additional fuel that isn't in the plan today, but with some line of sight based on the agreement, 2022, as it stands now, that's factored into the long-range plan. If it's accelerated somehow, that's going to cause us to maybe have to do some things that are going to increase that cost from what I stated earlier.
And I think one of the things that Tony points out with economic dispatch is that the benefits that you see, the savings that we calculate, are based on a hydrothermal optimization. So using your hydro when it's to the most benefit to you, and using the gas-fired units, thermal units, all the time to kind of fill that gap. And if you look at power supply curves, you've got the gas stuff here, and you might see the hydro a little bit here and a little bit there, and it's because you're trying to use it when it's most efficient and will save the most money for the customers.
Yeah, Brad?
We're not seeking an immediate solution here. We're suggesting that the time is right to start these studies. 2022 is coming up in 5 years. The documents say the consultation shall take place no later than 2022. Why wait? Cooper Creek provided a lot of learning opportunities on how to retrofit an existing hydro system to get water back into a river. Taking water out of a salmon river is no longer, it's not the way we do business anymore. So I think that there are probably some middle path solutions here that aren't going to kill anybody's goose, that might be sufficient to provide a bare minimum of water into this river. I think it's worth taking a look. We're ponying up $7.5 million. We'd like someone else to step up. The producers are called upon to fund these studies. Let's get cracking.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's any other comments from the audience? All right. With that, I'm going to close the work. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I have a personal proverb I try to live with, and that's neither speak nor make decisions when I'm angry, depressed, or euphoric. But I got to tell you, my outrage at how the Eklutna people have been treated for 100 years, literally, got to get into exponentials to measure it. And their land has been trampled on. That much of the Eklutna Valley has been used as an informal dump for used cars, appliances, sewage pumping haulers, and made a mess. The people at best were treated with disdain and not outright antipathy. And as a result of that, to me, it's a near miracle in human nature that these people are amongst the best citizens we've got. You go out in our area and look at the parks, the school sites, many public amenities like that, land that Eklutna has donated. And it's just a grand lesson in patience and betting on the future, I guess, and the goodwill of people. But I'm very eager for us to do all that we can to redress that. I hardly do anything in my area without guidance from Ms. Domboski. But my inclination today is for us to work with the Eklutna people a bit and gin up a resolution from us that when this thing gets to the governor's level, that there's a real emphasis, if not on the interests of the Eklutnas. Imagine, they own all the shoreline. Their people have hunted and fished in this area for 4,000 or 5,000 years, and they're not formally at the table except as a part of the general public. We can't cure what's gone on before, but I think we have a moral public duty to do what we can to redress the evils of the past. And if it costs us our pocketbook a little bit, so be it. We are the beneficiaries of a great legacy in a great country, and so, anyways, I stop speaking and preaching.
All right, thank you. On that note, thank you very much.